Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another entry in the League Encyclopedia. Today we are taking a look at patch 1416. There are lots of changes to champions, a couple to items, and a big change to how dying works in League. As always, my goal is to break down which of these changes will have a big impact, which will have a big impact on the pro scene, and which ones are, let's say, underwhelming. Let's start with item changes. There's only 3, but boy oh boy do they matter. Well, 2 of them do. Doran's Blade is getting absolutely gutted. Its bonus health is going down to 80 from 100, and its lifesteal is nerfed down to 3%. The lifesteal is whatever, but the bonus health is huge. I expect a lot of top laners will begin to pivot away from Doran's Blade, but on top of that, you can kind of think of this as a nerf to the remaining Doran's Blade users. The second big item change is to Blade of the Ruin King. And this one is rough. Both the AD and attack speed are down by 5. This item has been overperforming on ADCs, especially those that like to go mid lane, so these changes are mostly targeted at them, but there's another change to the item that makes it just a little less rough on the melee champions who still want to build it. They've bumped up the percent health damage on hit from 9 to 10. The last item change is that Black Cleaver no longer requires 0.01 seconds between stacks. This is without a doubt a buff, but how big is it? In most cases, that 0.01 second was not the limiting factor to how fast you could apply a stack, but in a few cases, like perfectly timed auto resets on Darius or Riven or a Senna auto Q, it'll feel nice. Champion changes this time around are mostly buffs, but first, let's talk about who's getting nerfed. Corki, without a doubt, is getting hit. Again. His Q cooldown is up at all levels, and the mana cost is now a flat 80. I think it's funny how they wanted to make him a viable bot lane ADC, failed miserably, and are now just nerfing him every patch until he doesn't see mid lane play anymore at all. Lucian is also getting nerfed. Although Riot considers this nerf a bit of an adjustment, make no mistake, this is a nerf. His Q damage is down, but his passive AD ratio is up by 0.05, which will make him scale slightly better, but you don't pick Lucian to scale. Lucian is an early game champion, so buffing his late game at the expense of his early game is just a straight up nerf. Qiyana's changes are more appropriately called an adjustment. Her armor and her Q damage are up, while her W damage is down by just a little bit late, and her ult AD ratio is also down. These changes should make her feel less reliant on her ultimate ability and feel better to play just throughout the game. I don't think this will push her into pro play, but for solo queue, it's a good change. The biggest changes to any champion this patch are without a doubt aimed at Senna. So, if you haven't heard yet, Senna's AD builds are getting hard nerfed, while her AP support style builds are getting huge buffs. Her Q base heal is up late, but no longer scales with lethality at all, and the AP ratio doubled from 40 to 80, and the AD ratio got bumped up to 40. The AD and AP scaling on her Q slow also got bumped up. Her R shield got buffed no matter what build you go, but it's buffed more if you go AP. Her W root duration is also up, but only by a quarter of a second at each level, and there's even more changes. Her base attack speed scaling is cut in half, and the amount of crit chance she gets per 20 souls collected is down from 10 to 8. Whew. All of these changes combined aim to do one thing, and that's to make Senna less of a carry, unless she's the one getting the resources. Will it work? Yeah, I actually think it will. It should pretty much kill the Ornn Senna lane that's been so popular in pro play. Alrighty, now that we got all that negativity out of the way, let's talk buffs. Azir's health regen and armor are up, and while this might feel minor, Azir is already a mainstay of pro play, and this will ensure that he stays there, and for the rest of us, these changes make him a better option against some of these more prevalent mid-lane ADCs until they really get pushed out of the lane finally. Orianna's AP ratio on her Q is going up by 5%. With the T1 skins dropping this patch as well, this one feels just a little shoehorned in, but it's still nice to have for such an old but consistent champion, and I would not be surprised if we saw just a little more buffs for her right before Worlds. Syndra is being pushed further into playing around her R, which now does an extra 10% damage per sphere at all ranks. Given how much of her power is now concentrated on stacking her splinters, I do wonder if a build focused on spamming all of her abilities, including her R, with Malignance will gain some traction. Sylas is getting a little more love than the mages with his base HP up by 25, and the AP ratio on his passive damage going up by 5%. On top of that, his W base damage is up as well. Sylas has always been a strong counter pick, and I expect with these changes we might see him just a little bit more in pro play, and his win rate in solo queue should go up a bit too. These changes themselves are pretty minor in isolation, but together they make up a pretty substantial buff. Okay, our last mid lane champ is Katarina, who's getting a pretty big buff to her Q at the expense of on-hit damage on her R and base damage on her E. There's actually a lot going on with these changes. So first of all, Riot is clearly trying to rein in her AD builds by reducing the effectiveness of on-hit. But they're also shifting power away from her all-in in general and on to poke. This means that Katarina's need to be more careful when they select how to go all-in. But it'll also be easier to set up those all-ins by being able to chip away at her opponent's health more easily. Vi received a small buff to her Q, which is curious since Vi is a powerhouse of pro play already, and with no changes elsewhere, I really don't expect that to change. I guess she's been underperforming in solo queue, but I'm skeptical that this will have much of an impact at all. Skarner's changes not only make him more durable, but also boost his AD power by increasing the ratio on his Q. I don't expect we'll see a lot of AD heavy builds because of this, but Overlord's Bloodmail might be more popular now that it scales off of health, and Skarner's a health stacking tank. Again, not a huge buff in isolation, but all three together, it's pretty big. And finally, we have the Monkey King Wukong. He's getting some buffs to his bonus attack speed per rank of E, and additional armor per stack of his passive as well. Now this should bump him up in solo queue priority just a little bit, but I doubt we'll see much Wukong outside of the Chinese pro scene where he's seemingly always meta. And that's it for champions. Now, let's talk about the absolutely major changes to death. Basically, they're 4 seconds longer in the early game. So obviously, that would be super punishing for anyone prone to dying early, and a buff to champions that thrive on kill-centered laning phases. But it's not the only change. They're also adjusting how home guards work. So, if you didn't know, after respawning, you get a movement speed buff. And this also kicks in after 14 minutes anytime you return to the fountain, and it's what's known as home guards. So, back to the changes. Respawn-based home guards used to decay over 5 seconds, but are now stretched to 8 seconds, plus they don't start running out while you're still in the fountain. So it's actually closer to 4 seconds of additional use time. So those extra 4 seconds that you're dead, you make up for by running back to lane faster. After level 10, however, death timers are unchanged. And at level 9, they're only 2 seconds longer. You probably know where I'm going with this, but the changes to home guards make it so that dying after level 10 means you get back to lane, or wherever you're running to, faster. Way faster. Anytime Riot changes death mechanics, though, we have to ask, how does this affect Sion? And frankly, this is a huge buff to Sion's push till I die strategy. So don't be surprised if you start seeing more and more Sions running it down again after level 9. And that's patch 14.16 in 10 minutes or less. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. And if you disagree with me, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Subscribe to see more videos like this one, and I hope to see you in the next entry of the League Encyclopedia.